is nothing wrong with your television set. Do not attempt to adjust the picture. We are controlling transmission. If we wish to make it louder, we will bring up the volume. If we wish to make it softer, we will tune it to a whisper. We will control the horizontal. We will control the vertical. We can roll the image, make it flutter. We can change the focus to a soft blur or sharpen it to crystal clarity. For the next hour, sit quietly and we will control all that you see and hear. We repeat, there is nothing wrong with your television set. You are about to participate in a great adventure. You are about to experience the awe and mystery which reaches from the inner mind to the outer limits.
I love that stuff, The Outer Limits. And that's the name of this, perhaps, series. We might do something that approximates or exceeds our magicians of mutability low those years ago. And we're going to call this, what did you guys decide to call it?
Invoking the Beyond.
That's beautiful. Okay. And all seriousness aside, all kidding aside, we started this off a long, long time ago, you guys, with the idea of a scientific dictatorship, and that is certainly, moving onward. We also talked about predictive programming and the manipulation and the mind-op that's going on. I know you guys might have taken some heat about that. That does not make you wrong. In fact, a lot of the folks who have listened to you and wherever you go, and this show, especially when you've been on, have gotten hip to the fact that we might be getting somewhat prepared for an event or events that we don't really realize. But nevertheless, it's there in entertainment. And that's a lot to bite off. But I'm going to throw it to you guys. What is your thought about the fact that where we're going, any culture, and this could go back for quite some time, despite the fact that it might not have been 24/7 TV and such, but there's always been out there a method to prepare a people for a certain event or whatever. And that's what I'm going to say to you now. One, are you in agreement with that? Two, are you doing something right now, either in article form or perhaps for another book, that takes a look at the culture and how it prepares the people for what they want to have happen?
Well, first off, the answer is yes and yes.
Yeah, okay, that's right. 7 questions there.
Yeah, and no, that's no problem. But yes, I would have to concur with you that, in particular, the medium of arts and entertainment has been used historically and is still being used to a large extent by dubious forces, some further up the socioeconomic food chain, to condition the masses to accept specific modes of thought and behavior, to possibly even accept some sort of event or some sort of series of events that is going to be consciously engineered. As for working with this topic, we wrote extensively on it in the expanded revised edition of The Ascendancy of the Scientific Dictatorship. And now we are currently working on a new manuscript which will deal with the question in regards to UFOs and to the UFO phenomena, because that has been a very large part of the predictive programming agenda, because basically the UFO phenomena, as the title of this series suggests, invokes the beyond, and by the beyond I mean forces outside of man, forces external to man, and forces that are that basically dwarf man epistemologically and ontologically. That they are forces that are current categories of knowledge, do not have any frame of reference for. Our current repositories of knowledge are dwarfed by the forces that are outside of our own experiential knowledge, and so the beyond becomes kind of like this this tabula rasa, this blank tablet that is basically expediently invoked by the powers that be to generate fear and cause panic within the population, so that the population will accept any initiatives or any agendas that they may wish to implement. And it can also be used to generate not only fear, but also reverence and awe for, say, some sort of benevolent beings from beyond that the power elite act as mediums for.
The presentation can be both hostile and it can be messianic in nature.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, I tell you, again, I know you've taken a certain degree of heat, which I don't understand, about saying this can happen to us, and I guess some people who have read your articles have looked at this as being falderal, and if anything, it seems to me an objection and a negation of their own misunderstanding of what's happening, not only to them but all of us. But it's taking place. But let me ask you this: I mean, we can go back in time. I don't know if we're going to look at Nazi Germany. It's probably what you might call the most modern example of this, and that would be. But who would you say orchestrates such a complete panoptic brainwashing manipulation of its masses? Is it any type of government at the time that needs its people to do a certain thing? In other words, we talk about elites, we talk about power elites and all that, and that's all kind of nebulous to a lot of folks. I believe it's an overarching situation that goes on. I think you also do. But inside those pockets, per every, not civilization necessarily, but every kind of movement, like the Nazis, etc., who does these things, and how do they know it's as effective as it can be?
Which usually can be the rich and powerful elites out there that own a sizable chunk of the entertainment entertainment industry. Rupert Murdoch comes to mind.
Oh.
But it's also just regular producers and artists and directors within the entertainment industry who might frequent some of these meetings held by different elitist circles, or they know different elites, or they speak to different elites. We know that Aaron Russo, for instance, had a sit-down chat with David Rockefeller at one time, and they are privy to a lot of the planning that goes on, to a lot of the planning stages for the future social engineering, and they feel a need to express this what's coming down the pike in an entertainment form, because that's their medium. That's what they know what they know to work through.
I believe it was the researcher Daniel Pausner noted in his tome, The Architecture of Modern Political Power. He noted that the X-Files tended to tout theories and hypotheses that were entertained also by Rockefeller think tanks.
We also know that the X-Files, actually 2 episodes, Chris Carter allowed Richard Doty to write. The Anasazi episode and the Paperclip episode. And Richard Doty is, of course, the individual who spread the idea of Christ as an alien, Jesus as an astronaut, as an ancient astronaut. He spread that myth to both Paul Benowitz and to Linda Moulton Howe. And we also know that Chris Carter was very chummy with several people in the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Yeah, and Richard Doty, by the way, was an intelligence operative.
Yeah, AFOSI.
Yeah.
Also, Carter admits, I told you folks that I had purchased the Millennium series that ran 3 years. Mm-hmm. And what I'll probably run is the audio from a segment where Carter says, and I mean, I take him at his word. I think you guys will too. I mean, obviously, what he produced would be somewhat evidence for such, and that is he got a chance to talk to, shall we say, interesting federal officials, whether they were black ops or not. But that whole thing with the Millennium, what he said about the Millennium Group, one of his statements were that these were a bunch of retired, perhaps, quote, retired FBI operatives, former agents that really never really retired, if you know what I mean, and got some things done. He left it nebulous enough that it was somewhat intriguing, and I guess you could say that he did that for the sake of promoting or enhancing the Millennium Series import. Yeah. But you guys, you've got some insight to what goes on as well, I think, in your own lives. And you realize that what Carter was portraying, more or less, even though it might have been spun to a certain degree to seem a little ludicrous, definitely within that shell contained a lot of what really goes on.
Well, what he did, where Carter basically decided to take a sensationalist twist was when he decided to present a monolithic conspiracy with an overarching conspiratorial hierarchy. That's kind of sensational and very unrealistic. It couldn't exist in real life. Political science, rudimentary political science tells us that, and just plain common sense tells us that. If one group tried to become the dominant group, all the other different special interest groups out there would begin to feud and fight with that group. Where he was correct, and what he did point out in the series that people should take note of if they're going to take anything away from X-Files and Millennium is that every society down throughout history has had two versions of the truth or of history. And one version of history is varnished, and the other one is not. And when you get into the underbelly of history, those historical undercurrents, and begin to study the unvarnished version of history, you start to find that things are not as organic and as accidental as it is portrayed in the above-ground varnished version that's prepared for the wider population.
I think we want to begin, as you folks indicated, with a look, and I'm assuming this, and you'll rectify this if I'm wrong.
Look on how science fiction functions as a form of predictive programming, because I kind of want to address the dynamics of that, especially given some of the criticisms that I've received.
Okay.
Since I began writing and speaking on the topic of sci-fi predictive programming, I've received emails accusing me of maligning a harmless literary genre, and some readers claim that science fiction is merely innocuous entertainment meant to stimulate the imagination. Now, in some instances, this may well be the case. There's some instances where a sci-fi program, a sci-fi movie, book, TV program, there are some instances where it's just satire, where it could be social commentary, but there's also instances where it's actually prescriptive. That is, it's normative. It makes recommendations, or it cloaks recommendations within a fictional text. Now, I've never asserted that every science fiction novel and or movie or TV show is a piece of predictive programming, but literary critic Martha A. Barter, who is not a conspiracy theorist, she's a literary critic, she observed that fiction tends to make strong normative statements. And a normative statement is basically prescriptive. That is, it presents a portrait of how things ought to be. For instance, normative economic theories prescribe specific systems to be universally implemented. Likewise, fiction can prescribe certain values, principles, philosophies, and worldviews. And this is especially true for science fiction, which veils its normative statements in fantastic and imaginative milieus. Utopian sci-fi is particularly seductive because its normative statements can be cloaked in visions of a very attractive future where prosperity, equality, and peace are commonplace. Now, when presented with such alluring prospects, seldom do readers consider the cost of realizing such a hypothetical scenario. Seldom do readers ever consider what it would cost them to have a utopian future. For instance, very few Trekkies ever consider what ramifications the fictional Federation of Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek, what the Federation's cashless system would have for financial privacy. As you'll recall, in Star Trek, the Federation has basically implemented this cashless society where there is no currency, there is no money. And all that the Trekkies know is that, according to Gene Roddenberry, the future created by the Federation is a desirable one. All that they see are the wonders of space flight technology and an unfolding galactic community. Thus, Trekkies swallowed Star Trek's normative statements without question. They swallow the idea of a cashless system, of a socialist totalitarian form of governance, all because of how attractive Gene Roddenberry has made the future look. Now, while Trekkies and other obsessed fans are rather harmless and arguably annoying, they are corollaries of sci-fi. The genre's normative effects, though, can be far more pervasive. Now, according to literary critic Martha A. Barter, again, the willing suspension of disbelief induced by science fiction encourages audiences to engage in sociocultural Gedanke experiments, what's known as Gedanke experiment. Now, Gedanke experiment is basically the German word for thought experiments. Gedanke experiment involved the tangible enactment of hypothetical scenarios in hopes of resculpting reality and creating a new consensus.
Hold on, would that necessarily mean then that the creators would necessarily wish to have, in this case, reality pattern art? I mean, would that be the case? In other words,
yes.
What you are concocting, and like even with let's take a look at Star Trek too. But in this situation, what you're saying is, and here we get into the manipulation of a whole people, and that is create something and wish that the reality would pattern what you're giving them.
Absolutely. That reality would readjust itself according to the paradigms presented, the narrative paradigms presented by the fictional text. The ideas in a Gedanken experiment, in a thought experiment, ideas are tested, and the underlying assumptions of the current culture are called into question. The precepts, the principles, the values that are of the dominant society are actually questioned because of the experimentation induced by the thought experiments.
All right. So in other words, not only could it induce, if you did it heavily enough, a certain outcome on the populace, it also could run things by the populace to see what floats and what doesn't.
Yes. Well, as the socio-cultural thought experiment progresses, it actually might even give rise to revisions in the status quo. So you have now differing views on what are societal norms. That's what makes it normative and everything. So no longer, say for instance, what did we value here in the United States, a little more more than 50 years ago. The Ten Commandments, the Judeo-Christian ethic. Now, as you see the proliferation of, certain science fiction, certain fictional texts, certain normative fictions,
right.
You've seen a gradual migration away from the Judeo-Christian ethic towards more of this morally relativistic pagan ethic.
Right.
And that's because the socio-cultural thought experiment it persuaded people to revise the status quo, to revise societal norms,
right.
And actually gave rise to the emergence of a new cultural paradigm and a new religious consciousness.
One example of a sci-fi show that actually called into question the present and began to inject into people the idea that perhaps we need to revise the present to get to this better future that we're presenting is one that came out about 20 years ago when we were just kids. It was a cartoon called Robotech. The present nation-state system is presented in that series as a system where wars are just perpetual and unending and nonstop, and the only way that war comes, that all this fighting comes to an end, is with a political unification that happens on a global scale.
Yes.
So it basically, right at the very beginning of the series, in a fictional context, it presented the idea to the population. In this case, the most impressionable sector, the children. It presented them with the idea that maybe this whole nation-state system that was set up with the Treaty of Westphalia was not a good idea.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I believe Robotech's producer, a guy by the name of Carl Masak, is a big-time supporter of the United Nations and has actually been to some United Nations conventions. But at any rate, so you have basically, because these Gadanka experiments take place, and the new cultural paradigms are cultivated, and the status quo is resculpted, you have the world of fact beginning to more closely mirror the world of fiction. The a priori assumptions of science fiction literature become the de facto precepts of culture itself. In a sense, fiction becomes a precursor to fact. The famous science fiction writer and editor John W. Campbell actually proposed that sci-fi presented, and these are the words of Martha A. Barter, again, who is not a conspiracy theorist, she's a literary critic, quote, an unparalleled opportunity for socio-cultural thought experiments, unquote. Now, there are several historical cases that affirm this contention, and like you just mentioned, we're going to look at just a few, and this is by no means a comprehensive overview of fiction's normative effects on society, but it's an examination of some of the most significant, and I believe you want to first look into the Weimar Republic?
Well, for something that we would consider modern by terms of all the millennia.
Sure.
And also one that is still pretty much with us, and unfortunately, as I've said to you on an aside, I think is occurring all over again. And
I would have to agree with you entirely on that.
Right, and folks are going, oh no, it can't be. The ones who are perpetuating it, I believe, are saying, oh no, that can't be. I'm like, well, that's what they said back then. So yeah, let's take a look at that, because I don't know if you want to begin with some of Leonard Peikoff's statements, which I think are very, very salient.
Sure.
But if that's the case, if that's where you want to go, I'm completely for that, because although I am not an objectivist, I'm not an Ayn Rand.
No.
Right, but still, that does not vitiate all that he wrote in that book, which I still consider extremely telling, and that was the ominous parallels.
Absolutely. Well, I'll just read this one statement that he makes.
Sure.
Quote, if art is the barometer of a society, then madness in the realm of art portends certain existential consequences. In the end, the equivalence of such madness, stemming from the same fundamental cause, will permeate and take over every social field, unquote. Now, basically, he was talking, at this point, he was speaking about how art can act as kind of a steering wheel for society.
Sure.
And at the time, one of the major avant-garde movements was Dadaism. And Dadaism basically embraced anarchy and irrationalism, because the Dadaists believed that the rational approach to the world had actually resulted in war, which how they arrived at that conclusion, you got me. But basically the Dadaists were anti-reason. They were anti-art. According to the Dadaist, art was excrement. And basically you saw the irrationality of the Dadaist begin to translate onto a socio-cultural level, onto an economic level as well. At the time, the Weimar Republic was very badly in debt. Of course, there was the Weimar Republic was suffering from the lingering effects of World War I. So,
in a financial sense, in an economic sense.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Germany's government needed a lot of money since 1914, and that was a lot more than what they even dared to tax the people, because they had to pay for war-related expenditures. They had to pay for increasing socioeconomic programs. So it was taking a toll on the German government. So in order to fight this onset of financial problems, to deal with these financial needs, the government decided to just run the printing presses.
There you go.
Which sound familiar?
Yeah. Bold.
So you have this hyperinflationary depression that takes place as a result, because eventually,
and that's all economic. That's an expression. That irrational economic policy is the economic expression of what the Dadaists were saying.
Exactly.
We're saying in art.
Yes, exactly. According to Peikoff puts it relatively eloquently. He puts it very eloquently in his book. He calls it, quote unquote, Dadaism in economics, unquote.
Because the best thing to have done is to just let the fever pass, and instead they start running the presses. And just cause the money. I mean, the more money you have in circulation, the less it's worth, and thus the prices for commodities are going to go through the roof.
But isn't that the point, though? That and he said in a very I don't know what chapter it's in. I forget now. You guys have the book, but he was saying that you can't look at what happened in the fascist world in the second half of the 20th century on who were the losers and who were the winners necessarily after World War I. There were other factors, and you guys just mentioned it. One, let's never forget the economics.
Right.
And if you're in deprivation, there's a certain kind of philosophy, I think, a certain kind of mindset, even among the intellectuals, that kind of looks at us as we're victims, and that feeds into a certain anger. I mean, that's my take. So let me throw it back to you. I mean, what about that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's why Dadaism was so appealing to the Germans, because the Dadaists, embraced anarchy, embraced irrationality, and when you're angry, anarchy and irrationality become somewhat more attractive.
Yes. There's a reason that we have this advice that circulates from the time we're young to the time that we're old, that you shouldn't make decisions when you're angry.
Right, exactly. But this was how avant-garde culture translated to economics. Now, to take it a little bit further, to look at the normative fiction of the time, several fictional texts actually played an integral role in the rise of Nazi Germany, and most notably, there was Wagner's Rienzi. Now, this opera dealt with Cola de Rienzi, a Roman popular leader who attempted to unite all of Italy under the Roman banner. Wagner's opera portrayed Rienzi as a populist hero and prescribed the proletarian dictatorship as an alternative to an aristocratic dictatorship. And of course, given its own proclivities towards becoming an oligarchy, a proletarian dictatorship is hardly an alternative. But nevertheless, this doctrine of class warfare pervaded Nazi ideology. Wagner's Rienzi was instrumental in perpetuating this doctrine, and when Hitler first saw the opera, the future Führer had what could basically be characterized as a virtual religious experience. Hitler was accompanied to the opera by his friend Gustav Kubizek, and Kubizek recounted Adolf's experience, and I'll read for you what Gustav actually said. These are his words, quote, "I was struck by something strange which I had never noticed before, even when he talked to me in moments of greatest excitement. It was as if another being spoke out of his body and moved him as much as it did me. It wasn't a case of a speaker being carried away with his own words. On the contrary, I rather felt as though he himself listened with astonishment and emotion to what burst forth from him with elementary force," unquote. And Kubizek goes on to state, as Hitler recounted his experience at the opera of Rienzi, as he reached basically the climax of it, he said that Hitler arrived at a state of, quote, "complete ecstasy and rapture in which he transferred the character Rienzi without mentioning him as a model or example with visionary power to the plane of his own existence," unquote. Here we have a virtual, just a textbook example of what I've been talking about. This fictional portrayal of Rienzi became a template, a paradigmatic template that Hitler actually overlaid with his own life. So you see how the normative effects of fiction actually came to bear on Hitler himself. And in 1938, Hitler would recall the event, his viewing of Rienzi with his friend Gustav, and declare, quote, "In that hour it began," unquote. In other words, it was at that moment that the idea of Nazi Germany was actually conceived, it actually began to take place. Now, Hitler also once remarked that in order to understand National Socialism, one had to first understand Wagner's Rienzi and Parsifal. Parsifal is very important because Parsifal was Wagner's retelling of a Gnostic tale by Wolfram von Eschenbach, who many believe was a Templar knight. But Eschenbach was responsible for the popularization of the legend of the Holy Grail. In Eschenbach's Parsifal, the Grail is actually a magical stone that restores the youth of those who possess it. And the Grail is protected by Templar knights in a temple on what he calls the Mountain of Salvation. And when Parsifal finds the Grail, it opens his third eye, which occultists associate with precognition and clairvoyance. Now, at this juncture, an overall theme becomes clear, and that is the Grail represents the cognitive powers of man, which allow him to facilitate his own salvation. And self-salvation is a core doctrine of Gnosticism, which constituted a sizable portion of Nazi occultism. Hitler actually attended the Benedictine Abbey in Lambach, and this place was adorned by the occult symbol of the swastika. The abbey was little more than a Gnostic mystery school, and the average German who was not interpolated into esoteric culture, they would have never recognized the semiotic Gnosticism that pervaded the abbey.
But let me ask you this, though. I mean, if they adopted, what would you call it, the Sanskrit sun wheel?
Yes.
And reversed it, I mean, but still, I mean, they're supposed to be a Christian sect.
Exactly.
And they embraced what certainly was Eastern mysticism, you know, so, I mean, again, like, what were you guys thinking about? But they embraced it, did they not?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And Nazism was also premised upon the occult doctrines of a Gnostic cult called Ariosophy. Basically, you already had, thanks to Wagner's Parsifal and other normative fiction that was circulated at the time, you already had this Gnostic paradigm, the cultural Gnosticism, basically already starting to pervade public thinking and public thought, and people were already being conditioned, basically situated, so as to accept it when it came into being. And so you see how with Nazis, how they qualified as basically secular Gnostics. They basically engaged in the Gnostic practice of what Eric Voegelin called immanentization, and that's where you reconceptualize objects of faith as objects of immanent experience. Now, what the Nazis did was they reconceptualized the Trinity, the Trinitarian notion of God. They reconceptualized the Trinity as an object of immanent experience. Now, when that Trinitarian eschatology was applied to the course of human history, it developed into the Nazi vision of the Third Reich. And this, again, was all because of the Gnostic text, or the Gnostic text and the cultural Gnosticism that was promulgated through normative fiction like Wagner's Parsifal.
All right, let me hold you right there, if I could, because,
sure.
I mean, this is a curveball to throw you, and it's only because, it finally dawned on me while you're speaking, as I'm looking back, flashing back to everything I've encountered, that we have some kind of, spiritual buffet, going on in Germany in this sense.
Yes.
You guys know the connection that there was around the First World War with Nazis through Sudetenland, among others, with the whole Islamic thing going on down in Turkey.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Sudetenland had actually been initiated into a Turkish Freemasonic lodge.
He comes back with that. Secondly, you know that Hitler was obsessed, if you will, with the mojo that came out of what the true Aryan races were, which came out of what, Northwest India?
Mm-hmm.
All right, and then third, you got the whole idea about this kingdom to the north, which is, in a sense, scripturally based, and understand where I'm coming from. The north always seems to be a good thing in the Bible, okay?
Right.
But we're dealing with Thule, or Thule, depending on what you want to say, that visionary thing to the north. So what you have here is a stew of all these, the Eastern mysticism and, the Viking trip going on.
Yeah. And what you have is normative fiction being used to package it all and put it together in a package that inspires the people. Because most of that stuff is just occultic mumbo-jumbo that the average person wouldn't really engage in, much less look at. But the way that Wagner presented it in his stage plays and in his operas, when you put things in an entertainment context, it can inspire the human spirit, and the human spirit can be inspired in a negative or a positive sense. And in Hitler's case, when he watched Rienzo, he was inspired. He had his road to Damascus experience, so to speak, but it was a negative one.
Yes, and if I may throw in something to bring this to contemporary times, so that it'll resonate more with the listeners. It's very interesting that you have this very, very pervasive form of cultural Gnosticism being promulgated through normative fictions like Rienzo or like Wagner's Parsifal. And then you take into account today that one of the best-selling books here in the United States, and just prolific sales, and very, very influential, especially upon people's religious thinking, was none other than the Da Vinci Code. Now you have again this resurgence of cultural Gnosticism, It's also interesting to note that Rienzo, which triggered the so-called Damascus experience of Hitler, Rienzo dealt with unifying Italy under the Roman banner. You have the themes of Roman Empire. Today, under the neoconservatives, you have the same Roman Empire model being implemented. You see, so you have the same sort of corollaries of normative fiction and its normative effects upon society, very much prevalent today.
But I want to backtrack really quickly here, and this is not tangential at all. If you look at the hierarchy of the Nazi Party, if you look at Hitler, if you look at the different individuals there, they will all say that the French Revolution it basically presented the blueprint and for their own revolution. And if you go back to the French Revolution, you'll find that it's one of the earliest examples of a Gedanken experiment. And just as we had this kind of normative fiction being circulated in Germany prior to the rise of the Nazis, that basically demonized the aristocracy and elevated these populist fascistic heroes. You also had this kind of in revolutionary France these kind of plays popping up that basically presented a radical plebiscitary democracy, plebiscitary democratic idea to the people, and demonized the aristocracy as well. In particular, under the Jacobins, when the Jacobin dictatorship came to power, and the Girardin Purge had happened, and the Committee of Public Safety was in control of things. Theater became a propaganda fount for the Jacobins, and there was one play in particular that had all of the royal family escaping and going to an island where they were destroyed in a volcanic eruption, and there were actually members of the Committee for Public Safety that were actually also playwrights as well.
Yeah, Dennis Diderot, I believe, was, now of course he wasn't public committee, but Dennis Diderot was one of the revolutionary France's luminaries who was a theater playwright, and his book Encyclopedia, which became the virtual Bible of the Enlightenment, actually featured Freemasonic symbols on it, and also a picture of Lucifer.
Well, Diderot and Voltaire represented more of the idea of keeping a monarchy. And what you do is you'd have a king that ruled according to the precepts of scientific reason.
Right.
So you have a scientific dictatorship that preserves the monarchy. With the Jacobins and the later philosophes such as Condorcet, they became even further radicalized and believed in destroying the monarchy and having a dictatorship of the elite disguised as a dictatorship of the proletariat, and that whole idea, that theme that theme of radical plebiscitary democracy basically was it permeated the theater at that time, all the different theatrical performances, and it was so radical that when Napoleon Bonaparte finally came to power, he actually outlawed all political theater. He didn't want political theater at all, any political statements being made in the theaters, and he had the theaters strictly regulated, and there was a lot of censorship.
A question though for you guys. All right.
Sure.
One, going back to the premise that we want to hold on to just for the time we've got as the base of this, whatever we're going to do. Napoleon does not want any kind of art to, I'm guessing, make the populace think. However, Wagner was successful because I guess it promoted the idea of an invincible Germany, of an Uberman, or whatever. All right, so here's where I'm going. Where Wagner was more or less allowed to do what he did because it was good for the people.
Yes.
Why, you look at Napoleon saying, like, well, maybe the arts weren't necessarily in favor of what he did, so he'd have a really hard time trying to find somebody who would do in the arts what he needed to promote what his empire was about to do. And so, in other words, here we have two things going on here. Napoleon sees, he can't possibly turn this thing around to make them support what he wants to do or to prepare the people for what is to come. And so he just kiboshes them. Then you look at Wagner, and he's right where they want him to be, so to speak.
He's sanctioned, and one censored, the other sanctioned.
Well, here's what happened. An Illuminist conspiracy was basically what led to the French Revolution when Gabriel Mirabeau came back from Germany and basically indoctrinated all of the most radical and most violent revolutionaries into Illuminist doctrines, and they became the Jacobins. But Illuminism was not a monolithic conspiracy by any stretch of the imagination whatsoever. It was the subversive. It was the subversive, secretive, conspiratorial wing of the Enlightenment, and basically broke up into two different versions or models for a scientific dictatorship. The first ones were the first model was based off of what Voltaire and Diderot had in mind, where you keep the monarchy, you have a king, you have an absolute king, an absolute monarch, and he rules according to the precepts of scientific reason. So it's a monarchy-centered scientific dictatorship. The more radical later philosophes and the Jacobins were for a scientific dictatorship, a model of scientific dictatorship, which would be a dictatorship of the elite disguised as a dictatorship of the proletariat, which would call for you eliminating some, if not all, of the monarchs at the time, to basically get the people to believe that this was a proletarian dictatorship. And so you find that Napoleon was very, very much for the idea of a scientific dictatorship based around with the monarchy still intact, with somebody there holding power with an iron grip, and he was helped in his rise to power by several Illuminists of the day, but he proved to be his own man, and he wasn't going to have the theaters doing the same thing with him that it had done with the governments prior. He knew that they could be used as propaganda fonts to knock him out of power. So, I mean, like, if you'll notice, whenever dictators come into power in countries, one of the first things to really get censored are the arts, because the arts can be a subversive tool.
Yeah. Well, Hitler obviously did have a purge on what he considered unacceptable art, right?
Right, exactly.
All right, now, there's two things I want to do in the 12 minutes we have left, without going into anything further, because I think what we're doing here we should do well. The one thing I'm going to do is ask you a question. The second thing is I'm going to posit a writing from Orwell on a character by the name of James Burnham. Are you familiar with Burnham?
Yeah, he's a neoconservative.
Right. I mean, if we look at the neocons today, we can look back to him and Kennan as the beginning of this. But this all has to do what we're talking about, and I want to spring it on you because I'm dirty like that. But going back to
play nice.
No, it's my show. I get to do what I want to. Nah. All right. But going back to the arts, and again, as we said, for those who feel that science fiction is nothing but, and that there is no truth in it, and there's no programming involved, and of course they're very wrong, and I know you guys have taken some heat from it, but that doesn't make you wrong. That's the way it is, and unfortunately, those who talk that way don't know that they've already been programmed.
Yeah.
All right, okay. So now, so tell me this, and it may have to do with methods of propaganda, and that might be the way in which it's portrayed to the people. Now, in the 21st century, we have 24/7 TV, we have entertainment. It is so easy to do.
Oh, yeah.
All right. But back with Napoleon, if you might, I don't think that this is, not relevant. Back with Napoleon, and then taking a look at Wagner and his relationship to Germany, isn't it interesting that the latter, Wagner, obviously, and here's the other thing I want to say, did he necessarily lend himself to what the state wanted? Because he was much more effective, and was Napoleon that much more bereft of that kind of aid because he couldn't engender that kind of support in the arts. Is Napoleon on the short end of the stick and would have been better off if he could have some way marshaled what Wagner did for Germany later on?
I don't think he was on the short end of the stick.
Okay.
Because if you look at the theater in France, there was some terrible feuds that happened. I mean, in the Comédie Française, the conservatives got into severe fights with the radicals over what was going to be in the theaters. They didn't like the idea of plays that demonized the monarchy, or that basically spread the Jacobin ideas. And if you look at the play of on the other side of the coin, the radicals didn't like it when the play of Pamela came out, because the play of Pamela presented a heroine of noble blood. And the playwright had to go back because of such fierce criticism. He went back and he changed the heroine from somebody of noble blood to a commoner. Napoleon could have probably got the more conservative elements in the theater behind him and all. The truth of the matter is that the man just didn't want to deal with it, period. So I mean, like, he didn't want to deal with the possibility of theater being used as a subversive tool, and the best way to prevent that from happening is to have no politically themed plays at all.
So in other words,
what he did, he said no political plays, political theater whatsoever. Everything is going to be censored and regulated.
So in other words, he was more iron-fisted in the sense of, like, I'm doing it this way, and that's all. That's the way it goes.
Well, like I said, he had come to power with the help of several different Illuminists, but he had gone through all of this crap, he with the revolution and all this stuff, and seeing the backstabbing that had gone on, and he wasn't going to have it happen to him. And so even though there were a lot of Illuminists that helped him get into power, when he got into power, he was going to be his own man.
Yeah.
And so anything that could serve as a subversive tool to help one of his competitors stab him in the back, he wasn't going to have that around. So he did away with all politically themed theater.
Also, there's something to take into consideration. At the time, Napoleon's dictatorship came in at the tail end of an anti-monarchical revolution. Hitler's revolution was beginning from the offset of a proliferation of European socialism at the time. So basically, you had two men both men began their political reigns beginning on opposite ends of the spectrum. One after an anti-monarchical revolution, and so monarchical sentiments were more amicable, and the other during a time when anti-monarchical sentiments were very much in vogue, because socialism was basically rising in Europe. So both men, the art that they chose to censor and the art that they chose to promote would differ given the cultural paradigms at the time. Either way, though, the point is that the fiction that was promoted had a normative effect upon the society at large, was designed to have a normative effect on the society at large, and did see sociocultural, economic, and political expressions on a tangible level. These ideas were actually tangibly enacted. The ideas of Parsifal, the ideas of Rienzi, the ideas of all the plays of the French Revolution, they actually saw tangible enactment. And this goes back to the concept of Gedanken experiment, of the thought experiment. Ideas are tested, their trial balloons are floated, and you actually see the migration from the abstraction of theory, from the abstraction of fiction, to the realm of fact. And so fiction becomes a precursor to fact.
Let's not forget that, too, because the whole thrust of this is how predictive programming occurs through the arts, which only, and we call it the arts nowadays, and that's kind of a corrupt word because what we're seeing today is garbage, but it's 24/7, wall-to-wall. So in other words, and I want to throw this out to you for a last comment from both of you, okay? But let me make this statement. So it's interesting that both Napoleon, let's say, and also Hitler, on the heels of the Kaisers, affect the same kind of desire for empire, but they do it through slightly different means, where one might suppress the, and Hitler and those, they also suppressed the arts also that they felt was decadent, but they also used that which they felt built a nationalism inside Germany, whereas what you're saying with Napoleon, it was like, this stuff isn't any good, so we're just going to go ahead and do what we're going to do.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. No matter what their different approaches were concerning the arts, both men were able to, and this is what the audience needs to take away, were able to appreciate the power of the theater and the arts, and what kind of effect they can have when they adopt a subversive quality to them.
You're always going to have censorship, but it's going to be a selective
censorship. That's right.
You see that today. You see a majority of Christian iconography being stripped from public arenas in favor, though, of other, more pagan and more obscene, vulgar forms of, I guess, if you want to call it art, I would call it garbage. But it's a selective form of censorship, and this is what you see in both the cases of Napoleon and in the case of Adolf Hitler.
But the thing is to carry away with this is that the same problem that existed back then exists today in the respect that the people higher up the global food chain appreciate the power that arts and entertainment and theater and media have, and how it can be used for social engineering, while the people down below see it as harmless, as organic, as just
just happening.
Yeah.
No, and it doesn't.
It's no different as any other place.
So that pretty much obliterates the mantra, just a movie.
It's only a movie.
Yeah, it's only a movie. Just keep telling yourself.
All right, well, I tell you what, hold it right there, because we're going to come back to this. I don't know that will approximate or surpass what we did with the Magicians of Mutability. I think we're somewhere there. This is a pretty hot button topic, even for those who don't even know that it's a hot button topic. But because it's all around us, and you don't know that you're in something sometimes. Yeah. Okay. Now I'm going to throw this out to you just as a parting comment. I'm not worried if we don't end, at the hour. But I want to throw this out to you because as you spoke to it, and contemporaneously with your show coming out, which will be the week of the 13th, I've begun part 1 of an essay which I think is really neat, and I thank a listener for showing me that these two parties met in a certain way. And that is Orwell wrote on James Burnham. And, a lot of people have no idea what Burnham was about. And we talked about this in the beginning. But, you talk about the Cold War and where we are today with neocons, you got to start there.
Yeah.
But his take on how he felt, and a certain angst towards Burnham. But I'm going to throw this out to you, and I'm going to ask you to comment on it, okay? Okay, it's a concise paragraph, and we'll just pick it up, okay? This is James Burnham that Orwell is writing about. What Burnham is mainly concerned to show is that a democratic society has never existed, and so far as we can see, never will exist. Society is of its nature oligarchical, and the power of the oligarchy always rests upon the force and fraud. Burnham does not deny that good motives may operate in private life, but he maintains that politics consists of the struggle for power and nothing else. All historical changes finally boil down to the replacement of one ruling class by another. And lastly, all talk about democracy, liberty, equality, fraternity, all revolutionary movements, all visions of utopia, or the classless society, or the kingdom of heaven on earth, are humbug, covering the ambitions of some new class, which is elbowing its way into power. Both of you take it. Whoever wants to go first, what's your reaction to that?
Okay, that sounds just like what Oswald Spengler said in his book.
Yeah.
When he said that there is no revolutionary movement, not even proletariat, that does not have the help of purse strings amongst the power elite, and all. Basically, the money of the power elite
is always there.
Yeah, was definitely there. Now, I would take issue with Orwell when he says that only an oligarchy can exist. I think that the American Republic proves that a government that's actually not oligarchical in nature can exist. But he's certainly correct when he speaks to these kind of mass movements that always popularize the idea of a proletarian dictatorship. What him and Burnham both, what he said about Burnham and what Burnham was saying was essentially correct.
Okay.
And Oswald Spengler recognized the same thing. Lots of different writers have recognized that.
But that's the point. It resonates because nothing is ever new, and I think this is what they're saying. It all comes down to this. I understand your caveat about the American Republic, which I might take a parting shot on. But, you see it for what it is also, and it's pretty much, same old, same old. All right, now, who the heck was I just talking to, Philip?
That's Paul. That was me, Paul.
Okay. Philip? Stop doing this to me.
Oh, well,
I don't know.
No, I'm Paul.
But let's be frank.
Sure.
No. Oh, it's getting late, Dan. All right, you got the last shot there, guys.
Sure. No, essentially, it goes back to the biblical aphorism. Nothing new. There's nothing new under the sun. And that's essentially what we see with predictive programming. The only thing I would argue is how sci-fi predictive programming differs from historical instances of normative fiction. Is that science fiction is slightly more persuasive, slightly more seductive, because it uses the literary device of the willing suspension of disbelief. Once you have the percipient engaging in the willing suspension of disbelief, that is, they of their own volition discard any and all notions of reality and adopt the narrative paradigms that are promoted by those who authored the text itself. Now they are basically in for the sell. They are open to and susceptible to persuasion, and so they all of a sudden it's easier for them to adopt the modes of thought and behavior that are being promoted by the author of the text, and so they'll actually engage in their own socio-cultural Gedanken experiment. They'll actually engage in their own thought experiments and basically test the ideas in reality, see if they can't tangibly enact the realities that are presented to them, whether on the movie screen or on the page of the book or on the TV screen. And that's all because sci-fi's medium is very, very seductive. Again, that willing suspension of disbelief is a very attractive notion for the percipient, because who doesn't like to get away from their cares and from their works? The problem is that the willing suspension of disbelief actually basically really nullifies one's own faculties for critical analysis.
The suspension of disbelief can also lead to irrational fear too. Phil, what was the name of that monologuist that did Monster in the Box and Swimming to Cambodia?
Oh golly, that would be oh shucks, and he died not too long ago.
I can play the Jeopardy music.
Spalding Gray, yeah, there you go.
Okay. Spalding Gray in Monsters in the Box. He's talking about how HBO wants him to do this special over UFOs, and he has to go to all these UFO conventions, and he's got to sit and he's got to listen to these abductees, and he's like, and I'm able to do it, and he's like, and I'm able to suspend my disbelief that long, and then at the end, and it's like thump, let the alcohol flow,
and the judgment with it. Yeah,
that's what he says, because.
Yeah.
Because I mean, like he's like it freaks him out. He's like these creatures are imparting no great knowledge to these people. They are harassing them,
and all, giving them anal probes and all that.
and then just when he's in that state of suspended disbelief, listening to these people and all, it freaks him out to the point where it's like, well, man, I need a drink.
Yeah.
Let me say this.
Sure.
When the doctor went ahead and checked me out for appendicitis, the old bit about the anal probe, it's like, well, can you tell that it's the appendicitis? Or I have no idea, Doc. I mean, get your finger out of there, man. It hurts like hell. All right, now look, I'm going to do this to you, and it's going to be excruciating, but I think it's a great teaser for part 2. And that is, what's interesting what you guys said, all right? And I'm not going to ask you to address it now. I'm going to ask you to come back and do that. Isn't it interesting, though, that through the arts as well, and this is where we're going with this whole situation, it's about predictive programming, which more and more people are catching on to, and that's a good thing, because they realize what's happening. And this has been happening probably for a good 3 to 4 decades with increasing intensity. And that is, when you offer someone an escape from that reality in that present time, especially through science fiction, you might, in fact, be releasing them from what they think is slavery or whatever that is into something that's free, but it's only another form of servitude.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's the whole reason why the willing suspension of disbelief as a literary device makes sci-fi so seductive and so attractive. That was what was in part helping propaganda like Parsifal. People were so miserable because Germany had fallen into this hyperinflationary depression, and they're using the German currency, as kindling on their fires to keep warm.
Right.
They were willing to accept these heroic tales and these Arthurian legends and just as Hitler took the paradigmatic template of Rienzi and overlaid it with his own life, so as to basically caricature himself as the modern incarnation of Rienzi. People were willing to do the same with Parsifal and with the mythical characters of Arthurian lore, with the myths of Gnosticism and of occultism. They were willing to adopt all these things. You see the same thing today.
Yes.
Kids are so angst-ridden and so anxiety-stricken that they flock to Harry Potter. Let me give you an example that's more autobiographical. For us, I mean, like most kids, went through a nerdy or a quasi-nerdy stage, and all. And I don't think that we were much different in all. I mean, like we certainly didn't stick in that stuff long enough for it to become anything of any consequence.
Well, let me ask you this:
lives.
Do you guys have vinyl liners in your shirt pockets?
No.
No, you're out of it then. It's okay. It's all right.
I'm sorry, man. As soon as the girls started to get curves, and bumps on their chest, it was time to leave that behind.
There you go, brother. That's right.
I mean, but this is what we saw. Okay, we played the role playing games. We played the Dungeons and Dragons crap. We would see nerdy kids who their parents didn't get, or they were alcoholic or something. Their home life was terrible, and they go to school, they get picked on, so they escape into the games like Dungeons and Dragons. And when you play Dungeons and Dragons, what you find out is that the goal of the game is never clearly defined. It's about gaining ever more increasing power, and you have to go up levels. Where does it end? Well, it never ends, because you eventually encounter a character. You're a level 10, they're a level 12. You got to take them down. You got to beat them out, so you have to raise up to that level, and so you've almost gotten into this imaginary pyramid scheme, and I saw kids just making themselves more miserable playing the games than their real lives were. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
It was a vicious cycle. It was terrible.
Again, I said I wouldn't let you answer, and I'll let you do that, but let me part with this. If we can, as a springboard to part 2. And that is, it's interesting that it would seem, and I don't know when you can make the cutoff. I really don't. I don't know when that happens. It might be the Second World War, it might be Korea, I don't know. But there's a point at which cultures, when they were about to fight, conjured certain images. There was a time when countries looked backward into the past, mythic as it may be, the time of the Round Table and all that, or Merlin, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Right.
And there's a time when science fiction took hold, and they looked to the future and what they might be able to attain. And there's some kind of, continental divide between where one would look back and try to grasp and conjured images of perhaps, a mythical kingdom that never existed, but it still worked. Nowadays, science fiction, I think, has moved people to a point where you can be this.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
All right. That's all I'll say right now.
I don't want to. I'm not trying to one-upmanship you.
Yes,
there.
you are. Yes, you are.
But what I would just modify what you said, and just a little bit. I think that they took all of those themes from the past and transplanted them
and made them
futuristic.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, like Han Solo, the rogue character. That's what he is. He's the rogue from Greek myth. Obi-Wan Kenobi's Merlin the magician.
All right, good point.
Yeah, all the mythical archetypes are recycled.
And again, let's. I mean, I don't. Again, with our outline and such, let this not get in the way. Maybe this is something we want to do as a breaker for show number 2. But I'll tell you what. Yeah, your point's well taken. You can refry and repackage the situation to fit every generation, and it seems to be more future leaning, but it still goes back to good guys, bad guys, and Excalibur.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, and we'll pick it up where we left off. We all know the blueprint as far as you guys drew up, and it's an acceptable one without a doubt. And again, not to be presumptuous about the time that you have, but I think we can do something with this, and I would like to pursue it. So, if Phillip and Paul, if you're okay with this, we'll drop it here and we'll pick it up for round 2.
Sounds good.
All right, bros. You take care, and I'll fly over your rooftop again, like probably tonight.
Sounds good.
See you later.
For Santa.
Well, I'm not dropping packages, baby.
Don't be cheap.
Okay. I'll see you later. Thank you very much, guys.
No problem.
God bless you. Bye-bye. This is part 2 of a series that may go on ad infinitum. We might be doing this way into the next millennium. No, not really. But with us today for part 2 of what we've called like the Outer Limits, Invoking the Beyond, are the Brothers Collins from the wonderful Buckeye State. And how are things going up there up north by you guys?
It's getting less chunky in terms of humidity, so So it's becoming better.
Yeah.
That's great. I tell you what, we have had this is the hottest summer in the 14 that we spent down here. I don't think it's global warming. I don't really care. It's just hot, and it doesn't rain. And we were hoping that Dean might crease us a little bit, just so we could get a tropical storm. No heavy, no winds blowing trees and houses over. Just we need rain so badly, and that is not in the offing, at least now.
Yeah.
With good old Dean skirting off and going to kick some booty, I guess, in the Yucatan of Texas.
Yeah, well, we lived in Florida for about 6 or 7 years ourselves and everything, and it's always been hot there.
Yeah, it always.
As long ago as I can remember, you don't need an income. That's not an inconvenient truth. That's just a friggin'
reality.
Matter of fact right there.
Well, let me ask you this: where did you guys live down here?
We lived on
Satellite Beach.
Satellite Beach and Melbourne Beach. And
Yeah.
All right. Did you ever have? What years would those be?
That would be, 1980.
Oh.
I don't remember the exact years. I know that it was from first grade to about third grade.
Yeah, during our grade.
Well, I just want to tell you that you were 8 years too late for my appearance with the Montreal Expos over in Cocoa. And I will tell you this: we were poor. There was no big contracts back then, and I came in late. And the last guy in has to sleep on the Naugahyde couch in the living room, and the air conditioning didn't work. We were on the beach, though. That was pretty cool. But you got fined if you swam. You got that? But here's the thing I remember: being very lonely and sad and depressed. And we had to open up the door on the second floor of this, garden apartment complex, just to get some air going through. And through my feet, between my feet, which were up on the arm of the Naugahyde couch, I could see Cape Canaveral and the gantries.
Wow.
And a song was playing at that time by Elton John. What was it? Rocket Man? When are you going to come down?
Dad used to work on the shuttle payload when we lived out there. He worked there at Cape Canaveral, and so we went to a lot of the launches. That's back when people actually cared about the shuttle launching.
Yeah, well, I tell you, I remember those days well, but the best thing is that when you turned over at night, while you, were restless sleeping, the Naugahyde bolsters used to turn with me. So if I stood up, I looked like the Great Padded Man. This is not the life that I envisioned on the bubblegum cards for Tops and stuff when I was going to be a major leaguer, and that didn't work out. But anyway,
no.
From small things, sometimes nothing happens, and that happened with me. All right, we've been talking. Pretty much, I guess we could say that the thread through this is predictive programming. I think it's something that people are becoming more and more aware of. Certainly those who get it, but even some on the periphery, noticing a change in certain kind of themes in TV shows and in Hollywood movies, and that's where we began. But these roots go back quite some time and had their essence in the written word. And I'm kind of thinking that we're going to take a look back at that. Is that true?
Yeah. Well, first, let's just start with just a basic recap of some terms and some concepts that we touched on in the last broadcast, just so that the audience, can keep along, pretty much follow along, and we can keep some thematic continuity. During the last broadcast, of course, we discussed normative fiction, what was known as normative fiction, which basically normative fiction proffers normative statements, and a normative statement is basically just a prescriptive statement, a statement that speaks to how things ought to be. It's basic, like normative economics offers economic systems that whoever the theoreticians are that's proffering them believe to be the ideal systems. So normative fiction basically in the garb of fiction, in the garb of a story, basically makes a recommendation, makes a prescriptive statement for society. And fiction itself has had down throughout history normative effects upon society. For instance, Uncle Tom's Cabin, and the normative effects of Uncle Tom's Cabin on the cultural milieu at the time of the pre-Civil War United States.
Positive example.
Yeah. Okay. And normative statements can either be good or bad, and it really depends on the author's own ideological propensities. So normative fiction in and of itself is not bad. The point is that fiction can have a normative effect on society, and that's very important. That's one of the reasons why people who have criticized us for discussing sci-fi predictive programming and caricaturing it as paranoia, they're not doing their homework. They're not looking back at history itself, where you can demonstrate where fiction actually has, acted as a barometer for culture to a certain extent. All of the arts and entertainment have acted as a barometer for culture.
Yeah, we came from the position of scholarship, not from the position of conspiracy theorist. And all of the major scholars out there will tell you that at some point, whatever society we're talking about, it's art, whatever society we're talking about, the arts of that particular society has at one time or another taken an activist role.
Yeah, but what separates science fiction from your average everyday normative fiction and makes science fiction a little bit more potent is the fact that science fiction uses the willing suspension of disbelief. And through basically the inducement of this willing suspension of disbelief, it also encourages the audiences, the readers, the percipients, to basically engage in sociocultural Gedanke experiment. Now, Gedanke experiment is basically a German word for thought experiments. And a thought experiment is basically where you take ideas, concepts, and these a priori methodologies, and you actually attempt to tangibly enact them on the plane of reality. You attempt to actually bring them to fruition. And Gedanke experiment is a very important process in sci-fi predictive programming, because basically what happens is that the percipients, the readers, who are basically exposed to the narrative paradigms of these science fiction novels, science fiction films, what have you, they are, while they suspend their disbelief and also to a certain extent suspend their own faculties for critical analysis, they entertain and perhaps even engage the ideas of the sci-fi writer. And if the sci-fi writer is a little less than altruistic in terms of their own ideological propensities, then they can encourage audiences to accept and even tangibly enact some of the principles, ideas that they are promoting through their fiction. And that can be extremely benign, but it can also be extremely dangerous. And as you know, last time I used the example of the Trekkie, the Star Trek fanatics. Star Trek fanatics, all that they see really when they watch an episode of Star Trek, they see the romanticized view of space flight, of humanity ascending ever upward, onwards, towards greater and greater things through technology, which is very, very reminiscent of Comtean positivism, which came out of the Enlightenment. And they see this extremely attractive future, and they suspend their disbelief, and they basically buy into Roddenberry's utopian vision for a federation, which is basically really on a socio-political level translates to a socialist totalitarian state. And if you look at all the the basic planks of his federation, all of it, it looks pretty much like Communist Manifesto. Cashless system, you have the abolition of private property, and of course, as history has demonstrated, this doesn't work, and this leads to oppression, it leads to bloodshed, but the Trekkie doesn't engage the critical, their faculties for critical analysis to tell them that. Instead, they're so engaged in the romanticized view of the future that Gene Roddenberry has presented them with that they just embrace it wholeheartedly and try to live it out as some sort of reality and become proponents for it, advocates for it.
I got 3 questions. Can I table them now?
Sure.
So we don't lose them. If you want to defer these questions, I'm sure you'll remember them and you'll do that.
Sure.
All right, 3 of them. All right, first of all, if we take a look at science fiction writers from the 19th century into the 20th century, we've really just gone just a short way in the 21st century. And we look at, like, say, proponents of science fiction, if you will. One of the most notable from, would you say, the 19th century into the 20th would be H.G. Wells?
Absolutely, and that's precisely who I wanted to touch on in this installment.
And then we go into others, with Dick and Aldous Huxley. Could you, and this might be speculation, but that's okay. I mean, let's hear your feelings on this.
Sure.
What percentage of the science fiction writers from the 19th century and the 20th century, if there's a break there because of burgeoning technology, I don't know what that really means, what impact that might have, but what do you think the percentage is of those sci-fi writers who had a little inkling what was going on and got, like a little preview of it and could write about it, as to those who were just maybe guessing? And how many of them do you feel were trying to predictively program, and how many were just having a hoot, for entertainment's sakes, like maybe Bradbury's 451. We don't think about Bradbury about being a real intellectual sci-fi writer, but you look at Fahrenheit 451,
Mm-hmm.
So that's an encompassing question. But the thing is, what do you think the percentages of those who knew what was going on and were doing the old PP, predictive programming, and how many you think were just trying to run with something good and make money?
That's a really good question, actually. I don't think that it's as clear-cut where you can draw a line between those in the know and those that were just engaging their imaginations and putting pen to paper and writing down their imaginations. What I think it is that there was degrees of knowledge of what was coming down the pike, that this writer knew a little bit more than this writer, and this writer knew a little bit more than that writer, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. It also depends on how much the writer had been actually exposed to the oligarchical machinations of the time.
And what were their reactions to the oligarchical machinations of the time? Because you bring up H.G. Wells, and he had a very favorable outlook to the oligarchical establishment of his day. But then you also brought up Dick. You brought up Philip K. Dick, and he had a very, very unfavorable view of as we see that. We see how unfavorable his view of the oligarchical establishment is in Blade Runner, where the elite live above the mass of humanity in a very privileged lifestyle.
Yeah. Well, would you also agree, though, that there is a certain amount of political involvement that might factor into this? And just using what we've done with the two characters, H.G. Wells was very outspoken, very much involved, if not in the politics, but in the whole, intelligentsia discussions that were going on. Whereas Dick, and I don't know that much about him, but he seemed not to have been so much of a mouthpiece during his life. And in fact, if his message was as dark as it was, one wonders if he wasn't terminated.
With Dick, when you read books like Valus, you get the idea that he happened upon this by accident, perchance.
and all. Now, Wells was a totally different story entirely, and I'm just going to let Phil run with the ball there. Let me go ahead and give the background on Wells, because Wells is very interesting.
He is.
Very interesting character. Basically, H.G. Wells held many dubious organizational affiliations. As you just mentioned, you just mentioned that some of them might have been directly exposed to or actually involved in the intelligentsia at the time. Well, this was the case with Wells. Wells was actually in the intelligentsia at the time. One of the organizational affiliations that he held was the Coefficients Club, and this was formed by a Fabian socialist named Beatrice Webb. And this organization assembled some of Britain's most prominent thinkers and social critics, and they would discuss the course of British Empire. The organization was a globalist one, but the difference is from most of the modern globalist organizations, the Coefficients Club promoted a unilateral form of world government as opposed to a multilateral form of world government. Their world government was a unilateral form of world government dominated by Britain, that is to say, a Pax Britannia. One of the club's members was none other than Fabian socialist and Malthusian ideologue Bertrand Russell, who was Wells's colleague, but at the same time was at variance with some of Wells's views. But at any rate, according to Bertrand Russell, Wells and several other members of the Coefficients Club harbored just this overwhelming preoccupation with war. One club member by the name of Leo Maxey had promoted war with Germany, get this, as early as 1902. Now, this preoccupation with war underscores the socio-political Darwinian pedigree of Wells and his globalist colleagues. Now, let me give you a little working definition for socio-political Darwinism. Basically, according to the deceased Vatican insider Malachi Martin, globalism can be characterized as socio-political Darwinism because its proponents view political, social, and economic interdependence as just a natural corollary of man's alleged political evolution. They believe that man who has undergone a biological evolution has also been undergoing a corresponding political evolution, and that evolution is leading towards a social, political, and economic interdependence. And so basically globalism is Darwinism applied to the socio-political realm, and so it's socio-political Darwinism. Well, Wells studied at the Normal School of Science in South Kensington, and he studied under Darwin's chief disciple, who was none other than Thomas Henry Huxley, T.H. Huxley, who, of course, was the grandfather of Aldous Huxley, who we'll probably be getting into a little bit later into this series. But T.H. Huxley was a Freemason, and he was also one of the founders of the Rhodes Roundtable groups. Now, the Roundtable groups would form the Royal Institute for International Affairs, which would establish a stateside branch known as the Council on Foreign Relations right here in the United States. And the CFR, the Council on Foreign Relations, is basically America's chief foreign policy cartel, and it's dedicated to expediting America's assimilation into a one-world socialist totalitarian government.
Would you consider them the shadow government?
I'm sorry?
Would you consider them the shadow government?
They are part and parcel of the shadow government.
Okay.
They comprise. Well, they don't control the government as is. I mean, it's not like a courier is sent out from Pratt House to the White House with marching orders for the president. What happens is that they're following very much the scheme put together by Wells, where like-minded people get together, congregate in these different elitist enclaves, and then they get out into the political establishment and spread out and get jobs and get employed within the government, and then from there they network, and so you have a network of like-minded people working towards a common goal.
Yes. But are they not the crafters, though? I mean, primarily of the NAU, the North American Union, in which nobody's hearing anything about.
Yeah. Well, according to the nation, it doesn't even exist.
No, that's okay. No, I mean, I'm saying that is because they are the ones who are crafting this, and as you well know, many of them are still holding positions as senators, as congressmen and such. Yeah. And so it seems like, and I mean, this is not where we're going. I understand that.
Sure.
But it's like they will, in their positions as active senators, congressmen, yada yada, and they would fight back and forth, and then they go back to the CFR, and things get done.
Well, but basically, what happens is they adopt the globalist view, and then they absorb one of the many different oligarchical models that are basically tallied about within the Council on Foreign Relations, because that's basically what goes on there is different models of world oligarchy are tossed about and debated, and so what happens is they end up adopting one of those models.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically they work towards the same objectives, but seldom is there ever a real consensus on the strategies that they're going to implement to bring about the one world government. To give you an example, during the Vietnam War era, the Council on Foreign Relations kind of experienced a bit of a rift, and that rift, of course, was known in popular terms as the doves and the hawks. There were Council on Foreign Relations members who were opposed to the war in Vietnam and opposed to basically the war at all cost with the communists, and then there were other Council on Foreign Relations members who had no aversion to it. Both saw their own sides as being basically being the only effective way to implement world government. One through perpetual war, which is the whole perpetual war for perpetual peace school. It's kind of based on that Kantian the Kantian view that you have to maintain peace through non-peace, which, by the way, is a very popular theme touted by Gene Roddenberry in Star Trek. And then the other side of that coin is the Doves, who believed in just gradual, incremental Fabian style disarmament and movement towards a one world socialist totalitarian government. Gradualism.
I want to ask you two other questions, but since you brought up Roddenberry, can I ask you?
Sure.
All right. I'm going to ask you the third and the second later. Since you mentioned Roddenberry, what I find is interesting is this. You know, for the most part, the way we were brought up is that the U.S. always had justification and righteous backing for going off the whole 20th century pretty much as the global cop, right? Mm-hmm. Or hitman, as some would say.
Absolutely.
Now, did you see reflected in the original Star Trek that we also, and I will tell you as a 15-year-old, I'm like right behind Kirk and Spock and the Federation, but what they do also seems right, but they're still poking their noses in.
That's absolutely correct.
All right.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very astute observation. And believe it or not, literary critics, not just conspiratorial conspiratorial research, but literary critics have pointed out the same problem with the Star Trek universe.
The trend in all the storylines when they go and seek out new worlds seems to be whatever is highly moral is also simultaneously highly intrusive.
Yeah, like why go out seek new worlds? Who asked you?
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
And if you notice, there's also a very John Ruskin, Cecil Rhodes type of mindset behind Star Trek, as is evidenced by their use of the universal translator. They basically break out the universal translator, which will completely and totally decipher all alien languages, and then basically, recode them as English, as if English is the one and only universal language to be spoken. Well, that basically harkens back to John Ruskin and Cecil Rhodes' school of thought, where they believed that the English-speaking peoples were superior, that the English-speaking people had a superior tradition, and that they had to bring all of the other non-English-speaking people under the dominance of Britain. And so basically, if when you look at the Federation, you kind of see like the Cecil Rhodes Ruskin imperialistic model, more so in a cosmic context.
Yeah, and I think that also. We don't know. I don't think you guys know, and if you do, you'll say so. But I don't know that I've read anything. I don't know that there's that much in-depth, honest work about Roddenberry. But at a time when the Vietnam War was, it's kind of still in its early stages, but getting very intensified, whether or not there was a predictive element also into making us believe that, the United States, as part of the Federation, has to go out there and do this. And so what's working on people's mind is they look at the United States over in Southeast Asia saying, well, this is our role.
Yeah.
So, I never thought about it until now.
No, actually, and I wish I had it in front of me, but it's very interesting that you bring that up. There's an excellent article in a book, by the way, which is titled "To Seek Out New Worlds," and the book is basically a collection of essays over science fiction and over the socio-political correspondence between science fiction themes and actual political themes. And by the way, again, this is not written by any conspiratorial theorists. This is written by literary critics. One thing that the literary critic who edited the book points out: seldom do politics and science fiction seldom do the demarcations between the two. Are they really that clear cut? And in this book, at any rate, there's an excellent article over Star Trek and over how problematic the themes are in Star Trek. And this literary critic also notes the parallels between America's foreign policy during the Vietnam War and the policies that are, touted in this very popular science fiction program at the time.
All right. Again, I'm going to take a look at this, but I know that listeners will too. Please restate that title.
The name of the book is To Seek Out New Worlds, and it's edited by Jutta Weldes, Jutta Weldes, Weldes.
All right, if that's edited, is there a series of essays then?
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely. And I believe that the essay that they're going to want, bingo, is entitled Diplomacy in Star Trek by Ivor B. Newman.
Beautiful.
And it's a very good essay. And again, this is not conspiracy theory. This is what's noted by a literary critic and, if I'm not mistaken, an expert in political science. He notices also that there's some very odd synchronicities to be noted between America's foreign policy in Vietnam at the time and the Federation in this fictional program.
All right, so I'm not even thinking about this before the show, and I'm not I'm fine. I'm slow to get a lot of things, but in essence, then, and even when I was a kid watching that in high school, I didn't actively relate the two, and none of us did in conversation. I never remember saying, doesn't it kind of like pattern what we're doing here on Earth? And none of us said that, but this is the essence of what we're doing as far as the show goes, and that is, you can call it conscious, you can call it subconscious, but we might have been, integrating this, inculcating this, and feeling, without knowing it, that as we looked at our foreign policy in reality with Vietnam, we might have been taking on this bit of jingoism that we got from Star Trek.
Absolutely, that's absolutely precisely the way that you look at it. And if you look at their Roddenberry's so-called evil empire, his equivalent of the evil empire, the Klingons in Star Trek, just the very name, the Klingons, is very it's actually very intentional. They're called Klingons, and they're these cranially disfigured aliens. You know, very atavistic, very primitive, and extremely brutal, brutish, and just almost anti-intellectual warrior type people. He calls them the Klingons because they basically cling on to their own traditions, and they don't embrace the supposedly good, universally acceptable traditions of the benevolent Federation. That again, this harkens back to the jingoist imperialist tradition that has basically kind of co-opted the United States foreign policy, and comes out of the Rhodes Roundtable and H.G. Wells' vector of the conspiratorial world.
It runs parallel with the establishment mindset that anybody that still holds to what the founders came up with as an ideal form of government are brutish and backwards and Klingons.
The Klingon chicks were hot, though. Beg your pardon? The Klingon chicks were hot.
Oh, yeah.
Never mind.
So,
Never mind.
I'll stick to the green girls.
All right. I brought this to a new low. Let me throw this out to you. Two quick ones, and I'll and get back to the outline if you don't mind.
Sure.
What you were talking about again raised the question. This was number 2, in between 1 and 3, which I wanted to ask you, and that is, if I go ahead and I have reasonable information that allows me to project a way that things will be, as we all are doing, you guys do it, I do it, we get called conspiracy theorists. However, if I couch that in science fiction, does it suddenly become palatable?
Yeah, absolutely. Somebody that understood that was J. Michael Straczynski, because I believe that man has wanted for the longest time to expose the establishment, and he wanted to avoid the ridicule. Well, how do you do that? Well, I've got so many years of film school behind me under my belt. Maybe I can just go ahead. Now he's doing it not from a sci-fi predictive programming perspective, where he's going to start prescribing on behalf of the elite, but he actually uses science fiction as a way of warning people. There's two different types. You're trying to either create the future or you're warning about the future, and that's what J. Michael Straczynski was doing. So yeah, what you're talking about is absolutely true. I mean, if you put it in an entertainment context, people will be a lot more merciful with you.
Yeah, and they will get the same message, but, well, one, they won't take it as seriously, but two, whenever it comes up, they're kind of like already prepared. Last question, and I'm going to let you get back to like I said, the outline. And this is, we have in the printed era, and of course that print extends into, now and forever. That's the great thing about print. If it doesn't go down the memory hole, you always have it there to read. But do you think that predictive programming, deliberate predictive programming, science fiction works in print, i.e. H.G. Wells stuff, Huxley stuff, etc., do you believe that, and even going into Dick, even in the era of obviously heavy-duty movie and TV, do you know that the printed word had more of an impression on its readers than today's audience is impacted by really what comes down to 24/7 TV and films?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, Michael Hoffman, who I'm not a big fan of, given his anti-Semitic slant, he has written about how the written word is much more effective than the television internet generation, because it cultivates a greater attention span, and your mind is more actively engaged in what it is that what it is that you're doing, what it is that you're reading. And I for one am not one of these people that likes the ideas of libraries going entirely internet and abandoning print books and paperbacks and all of that sort of jazz. I think that we need to stick to the written word and yeah, exactly what you're talking about.
Well, what about this? What about the printed word having an impact on whoever those individuals are, who have an IQ and are very actively, critically, and analyzing such, that works on them, while the electronic stuff, the movies, TV, work on people. I mean, I hate to split it up in in elitist terms, but those who don't really think don't care to. In other words, does the entertainment industry deal with that particular segment of society, which is most of it, while those who dare to read, who are intelligent, might be won over by prose?
Yeah, I can see that. I can definitely see that. I mean, it goes that way. But although I think that the whole Jonathan Swift idea of the Yahoo is really what's popular right now, just getting everybody out of books and onto the internet or onto TV screen seems to be like the real strategy. I mean, like they almost want an abandonment of the written word entirely.
Well, that's what I was going to say. In other words, even those who are intelligent people who might even be just coming home and saying, look, I don't want to integrate any really serious information. I don't want to read. My brain hurts. So I'm going to watch TV. I'll watch a movie, and they're going to get it there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it's understandable. I have to admit, I can see people doing that. What I've done, I'll tell you, who cares? But I'll come home but I refuse to watch TV. I tell Lady Biz, it's like no more information. Whereas I would sit there and just drool watching something, I'm like, no, I don't want to do that, and I'll just book it. I'll just do something. I'll put headphones on and listen to the Bee Gees. And of course, that also has a nefarious meaning. No, it doesn't. I don't know. All right. So anyway, thanks for going off that side road. I think the questions were relevant. I appreciate you addressing them. But let's get back onto the trail of HG and the boys.
Okay. Well, we were, of course, discussing the Council on Foreign Relations and its connection to the Royal Institute of International Affairs. Well, one of the individuals that sat on the Council of the Royal Institute of International Affairs was Arnold Toynbee, who was a lifelong collaborator with H.G. Wells. Toynbee advanced a thesis concerning the perpetuation of global oligarchy, and basically Toynbee noticed the inexorable decline of past empires, the Roman Empire, the Egyptian pharaohs, etc. And Toynbee argued that the imperial regimes could be sustained, but they'd had to be sustained through the initiation and tutelage of a priesthood devoted to the precepts of oligarchy. And the British Roundtable groups represented a tangible enactment of this prescriptive thesis. This oligarchical power structure was an outgrowth of socio-political Darwinism, which views interdependence as a progressive function of evolutionary progress, and this was the pedigree of Wells and his associates. Well, this pedigree found expression through H.G. Wells' science fiction. For instance, in the book H.G. Wells and the Culminating Ape, Biological Themes and Imaginative Obsessions, literary critic Peter Kemp characterizes H.G. Wells' Time Machine as, quote, a blend of Marx and Darwin, unquote. Not surprisingly, the Time Machine presents a future where an ignorant and indolent race called the Eloi luxuriate in a pastoral communist society. Given the agrarian variety of socialism invoked by Wells, one might discern shadows of the coming regimes of Maoism and the Khmer Rouge. But the Eloi's utopian existence doesn't come without a price. They're subjected to a system of institutional parasiticism under the predatory Morlocks. Now, are the Morlocks a metaphor for the oligarchical machinations, the roundtable groups, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, etc., that Wells was intimately affiliated with? Now, certainly one detects the socio-political Darwinian theme of natural selection, which Haeckel characterized as quote-unquote aristocratic in the strictest sense. And this Darwinian theme of natural selection, of course, is universally applied to the theories of governance and political science. Other piece, and this is the case with the time machine, which basically shows this survival of the fittest template overlaid with a utopian society, a utopian system, in which the Morlocks basically predatorily cull the herd of the Eloi, and the Eloi get to enjoy, to a certain extent, certain luxuries, somewhat petty, empty luxuries, creature comforts of that utopian society, but they have to pay for it by basically sacrificing their numbers. And the Morlocks clearly are the dominant creatures in the food chain, but they basically call the Eloi through a system of parasiticism and through a system of basically calculated sacrifices. They basically routinely at certain times call the herd, and you can see parallels today with that sort of system and with that sort of method of governance. This idea that the rationale of spaceship Earth and the idea that we can only enjoy paradise and heaven on earth, but it's going to involve sacrifices. And so the Morlocks, one can't help but wonder if the Morlocks aren't a metaphor for the elite. And certainly you can see the Morlock type of mentality in Wells himself.
Well, weren't the Morlocks kind of like scumbag animals?
I'm sorry?
Weren't the Morlocks the ones that came out from below who were really brutal?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
All right, because I'm looking at them also. I'm thinking in terms of what Orwell was talking about in 1984 is the proles. In other words, they'll do the wet work. I mean, I don't mean to distract you, but I mean, I didn't see them as elitists, but I saw them as necessary to do the wet work.
Well, they were certainly the agents of eugenical regimentation on behalf of the elites, in the very least, in H.G. Wells' book. See, what he was trying to do with the Time Machine was, in a fictional context, put forward a prescription that would turn humanity off the road that the founding fathers of America had gotten humanity on, where they basically worked to reverse the whole master-slave trend, and he wanted a return to that trend. We've seen this with George Washington when he refused to accept a title of nobility, thus establishing an anti-militarist and anti-statist foundation for the United States that was be totally intolerant to slavery. And the founding fathers, by the time they were on the scene, slavery had been around for about 2 centuries. But with the revolution, they decided they worked to turn that around, and they were successful. And now Wells was trying to reverse the trend through his science fiction by presenting this kind of master-slave setting with the Morlocks and the Eloi.
Yeah, and don't you think that's where they want to go? I mean, eventually they just want enough people around to do their wet work.
Exactly. And again, it's the idea of natural selection now. That template, the Darwinian template of natural selection, overlaid with political science. So you see a system where the sanctions of natural selection are basically enforced by eugenical regimentation, and you see this very much tangibly enacted in Wells's own biographical life. H.G. Wells, for instance, he wrote the introduction to Margaret Singer's book, The Pivot of Civilization. And anybody who's first off, I mean, Margaret Singer, of course, has been touted as the champion of reproductive rights and everything. And it's from her that we get Planned Parenthood and the whole abortion industry. But if you ever read this book, and I'd highly recommend that those with the stomach do so. Margaret Singer basically advocated the implementation of a gulag system here in the United States for the internment of those who qualified as genetically inferior, for the retarded, for girls who, in her estimation, were morons. They need to be sterilized. Just hideous, disgusting, terrible policies. And Margaret Singer was also a supporter of the Nazi eugenics programs. And I believe it was Ernest Rudin who oversaw Hitler's racial hygiene programs, wrote for Margaret Singer's publication, Birth Control Review. But H.G. Wells wrote the introduction for The Pivot of Civilization and spoke very highly of Singer and of Singer's work. And you see that eugenical paradigm very much alive in The Time Machine. This idea that we're going to have utopia, but utopia has to be maintained at a cost. The herd has to be routinely culled, and if it calls for people doing ugly things and thus becoming ugly monsters themselves, thus being Morlocks, then so be it. But that theme is very much prevalent in The Time Machine. And another piece of Wells's science fiction, which promotes socio-political Darwinism, was particularly War of the Worlds. And War of the Worlds underscored his socio-political Darwinian propensities because the central theme of War of the Worlds was derivative of Darwinian militarism. And what Darwinian militarism is basically the view that warfare, whether on a microcosmic level between species or on a macrocosmic level between nation states, leads to progressive biological development, and the